Today on Adversity to Strength, I'm joined by Jennifer Chase, a woman who's lived through addiction from every side as the daughter of an alcoholic, as someone who's battled her own addiction, as the mother of a recovering addict. Jennifer is now founder of Rise Addiction Life Coaching, where she helps families heal from the chaos, pain, and shame that addiction brings into their lives. Her story is raw and honest, one of breaking generational cycles, finding boundaries, learning that recovery isn't just about getting sober, it's about rebuilding your sense of peace and self worth. In this conversation, Jennifer opens up about what it takes to love someone through addiction without losing yourself, how she turned years of darkness into a mission to help others, and why healing the family is just as important as helping the addict. This is a story of courage, compassion, and what it really means to rise after addiction. Jennifer, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolute pleasure. Take me back to the beginning of your journey. Where did it all start for you? Because it certainly seems an eventful one.
Yeah, for sure. So I come from at least four generations on both sides of my family of addiction, right? So
Right.
four generations down my mom's side and four generations down my dad's side. Most of that was
Yeah.
alcoholism. I had a grandma that was an opiate addict in the 50s before that was kind of a thing to be. But for the most
Yeah.
part, alcohol was a very normal experience in my life. You know, when we're at the lake, the adults crack one open at 9 a.m., right?
Sure.
And I
Yeah.
don't remember an evening really in most of my childhood where there wasn't alcohol consumed in the evenings. And so it was pretty normal. And unfortunately, I'm part of a statistic that says one out of every six girl and every one out of every six boy that sort of grows up in that dynamic is sexually abused. And I was being sexually abused by my mom's dad. Um,
Oh,
and so that's kind of how some of my experience as a child sort of started. And I think, I'm the youngest of three children. My sister is 5 years older than me, and my brother is three. And I look at those relationships, and they really had a connection with one another, right? They really enjoyed one another, but not so much me. At least that was the
of
way that
course.
I felt, right? So
Yeah.
I was kind of always the third stool, the third step on the stool. I was kind of always the one that was left out. I spent a lot of time
Yeah.
by myself. My dad, who was an alcoholic, was my guy. Like I knew, like I loved my dad. I just cherished the time with him. But because he was an alcoholic, it was super erratic, and I didn't quite know who I was going to get when he walked in from work, right? Was he going to be my guy, or was he going to be angry, sometimes erratic behaviorally? Like I didn't know who I was going to get. And my mom, maybe some of your listeners can um, feel me on this. It's like my mother and I still to this day just we don't speak the same language, right? If she speaks English, I speak German,
Yeah.
right? We don't feel emotions the same way. We don't communicate the same way. Like there was just something about that relationship with my mom that just was off, right? Just didn't feel great to me as a child. And for me early on, there was a common denominator to every single one of these relationships. All of them, whether it was my grandfather, my dad, my mom, my sister, my brother, all of it. And the common denominator was me. Like I knew, and I say knew instead of felt because it felt so real to me as a child that I was the problem. Like if I could just be more quiet, less emotional, happier all the time, if I could just be something other than who I authentically was, then these relationships would be different.
Yeah.
And so I remember I was four. We were living in Portland, Oregon at the time. And at the age of four is the first time that I barricaded myself into my bedroom and started isolating, right? I put like all my stuffed animals and record players and things in my room up against my door to be by
Cool.
myself at four because I knew that if I could keep the outside world from getting in, I was going to be okay. And so that was kind of the early journey for me as a child. And of course, anyone that's been through living with addiction or been through sort of the trauma of sexual abuse, um, it's a journey, right? Won over years. There's a book talking about how our body keeps a score. And
It's a great book. I've got
yeah.
it.
And my little mouth didn't or my little didn't have the words to
Yeah.
articulate what was going on inside of me, but my body was telling me that something was very, very wrong.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was just kind of how it all started for me. And I think maybe the most important thing to know about me is that I was never ever going to be like the adults in my life. Like I looked at their inability to change the dynamic of addiction, to to move outside of addiction. I viewed that as pure weakness. Like I believed I had more courage in my pinky finger than they had in their whole bodies, right?
What age were you when you were thinking this? So I'll get the feeling that
Oh,
you're having
early.
like adult thoughts when you're like a
Yes.
kid, you know?
10. 10
10.
probably is
Yeah.
when I started saying, wow, this is not going to be me, right? Like you could
Yeah.
do something about it, but you are just choosing not to. That was my mindset.
Yeah. That's a strong one because you're in an environment that's normalized, that would have
Yeah.
normalized that kind of behavior. And yet you're still saying this
There was,
isn't for me.
there was something that in me that knew the experience was wrong, at least wrong for me, right? And I could say wrong. Obviously, the sexual abuse is terribly wrong, but
Yeah.
the dynamic didn't work for me. I share this, and if any of you have addicts in your life, what I'm about ready to say, if you ask them this question, my guess is they're gonna say yes, me too. I always felt like a square peg in a round hole.
Just
Like
in the family environment.
just
Yeah.
in like I always felt like I felt differently than them. Like I felt like everybody else was given a manual of life when they were born. Like if you get a flat tire, page 35, if you get your first heartbreak, check out page, 135. And when I was born, they were out of print. And they were like, sorry, baby girl, you're going to have to figure out how to do this on your own. Like it looked like everybody else was able to just guide through life
Sure.
and I was the problem.
Yeah.
Um, and so it was around 10 where again, my body was telling me things that I didn't know how to articulate, but it was like, I'm not doing this. Like, if I ever have children, they're not going to grow up like this. If I,
Yeah.
like, I'm stronger, more courageous than the adults that have come before me. And so, even as I started to use substance when I was in high school, I started to drink a little bit in high school. And when I went to college, hyper aware that I had some biology, right? I knew that I had the biology. Um, and so I was always very careful. I was always the first one. Like if we needed a designated driver, it was me.
Right.
If we needed somebody to like, be the adult in the room, I would be that person. But college is when I started to put a connection together that if I drink more, I will feel differently. Right? If I drink more, I will be funnier. If I drink more, this boy will like me. If I drink more, I will be less anxious. Um, and again, I didn't know what to do with that information, but that was when I started to sort of put a connection together to changing the way that I feel inside being connected to substance.
Yeah. Did you feel at that time? So how old were you at the time when you were slowly going towards, say, like alcohol and addiction?
Yeah, I started drinking probably when I was 15-ish.
15.
But college is where I really probably started
Yeah.
drinking to the
Oh,
point that I was, having
yeah.
experiences like that. Yeah.
Did you feel yourself knowingly going in a similar direction to the family that you were doing trying to do your best to not imitate, or did it just happen?
Yeah, I didn't. And the funny thing is that as I continued to share my story, like I didn't actually end up being an alcoholic, right? I ended up being addicted to opiates. And I think part of that journey for me was that I was hyper aware of alcohol. Like that
Right.
was really the only substance that I really considered because it was kind of what I knew growing up, right?
Yeah.
And so I think because I was so sensitive to it, um, I I just knew in the core of me that that was never going to be my story, that I was never going to be an alcoholic. And unfortunately, I got married and had my babies, and I believed that I had done it. Like, I was in an incredibly happy marriage. I was a stay-at-home mom to these babies that I just like leapt out of bed in the morning to be their mom.
Yeah.
Um, and we didn't have substance in our home. There's very little alcohol drinking. Like, I believed I had done it. In fact, one evening when I was in my early 20s, I called both of my parents to let them know that I had more courage in my pinky finger than they had in their whole body. Like, I'm like, you could have had the life that I've chosen, but you just didn't have enough courage to do it.
What
Uh,
did they say?
it was,
Denial?
well, no, I think differently. My dad died of alcoholism in 2015, and I never heard him admit that he was an alcoholic,
No.
right? Never a day in his life. So it was more like, go, like, you're crazy, right? Like, you're the problem. Again, loved my father, loved him to the day that he took his last breath. And my
Yeah.
mom, I think at that point in the journey, um, wasn't really ready to take responsibility, but started to just sort of soak in some of the information that I was saying to her. Um,
Yeah.
she didn't know what to do with it yet either, but I think she heard me at least. Um, and then January 3rd, 2003, which, was 20 some years ago, on a Friday, I had a pretty bad headache, which I had had throughout my life. And my husband took me to the hospital. Long story short, there was a couple of things that happened throughout that day, but at the end of the evening, they did another scan and they found a pretty significant hemorrhaging brain tumor in my head.
Yeah.
And I was
God.
given about 12 hours to live if I didn't have a successful brain surgery.
But you started the morning fine.
Yep, yeah, and I had suffered with migraines most of my life, and so I had just
Right.
thought it was
Assumed it was.
just something like that. And when it didn't go away, I kind of called and they said, let's just come do another scan, which I had had a plethora of my whole life, so I didn't really think much of it. Um, but that night they found the tumor that had been growing in my head my whole life, actually, that they just hadn't found. And that led me on my path to opiate addiction.
Right.
Uh,
Tell me a little bit about opiate addiction there. Tell me a little bit about that. Was that like prescription?
Yeah. So after I had my brain surgery, they caused some nerve damage when they removed the tumor. Excuse me if you can hear my dog barking.
All
And
good.
okay, and so the prescription started, right? Like, I remember I share this story because I think it's so important for those people that don't understand what it's to like to be in my brain as an addict. I was about 2 weeks out of surgery. I was at home in bed and I was under the influence. I was taking my medications as prescribed, but under the influence. I could hear my family in the living room playing. They were playing a game that I was familiar with. And I said out loud, as though there were another 10 or 15 people sitting in that room with me, where the hell has this been my whole life? Like,
Really?
in that moment, I finally felt like I fit in my skin. I was 29 years old. I finally didn't care that I had been sexually abused by my grandfather, or that my dad was an alcoholic, or that I never really connected with my mother, or that my siblings didn't like me, or that I had just literally had to say goodbye to my children 2 weeks before and didn't know if I was going to survive. Like, finally, in that moment, this feeling that I thought everybody else experienced in their life. Like, I felt like this was like the normal line for everybody else. And I was finally experiencing it for myself. And that was the day that I lost choice when it came to substance. That was the last day that I was addicted to opiates from that moment emotionally, quite a few months before I was addicted to it physically.
I'm just guessing. I'm just guessing. You hadn't had any like therapy beforehand.
I had therapy. I had, because when I found out I was pregnant with my daughter, I realized I had zero business raising a daughter. Like, in my family, my grandfather who abused me was a twin, and they both abuse children. So you have to assume they were also abused, right? So we're
Yeah,
looking
yeah.
at like 4 or 5 generations of sexual abuse in my family. And so when I found out I was pregnant with a little girl, I was like, we've got to figure this out, right? Because the only thing that mattered was that my children had a different life than I had. So I
Yeah.
had gone to therapy for some of that experience, but I was so far from healed, right? I was
Right.
so far from like being in a healed place. I still was carrying a lot of resentment, a lot of anger. Um, hadn't certainly forgiven anybody in that journey of mine, and so yes, I had been to therapy, but I was so far from being from a
Were you,
place
were
of
you, were you aware you were carrying all that anger and
yes,
resentment and unresolved? You were aware, yeah.
yep,
And
yep,
it kind of makes sense how quickly you got that addict because
yep.
you know yourself. I'm diagnosed with CPTSD all through similar experiences yourself. And when you have that moment that pain goes away, it's
Yeah.
just like almost impossible to let go of that pain. I mean, for me, it's
Well,
been
and it's
fleeting, you know.
it's almost impossible to also describe that to somebody that doesn't experience it, right? And I think I call myself the neighborhood addict to families that I work with because a lot of them are like, I don't understand what's going on in their brain.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I,
yeah,
and I try to help sort of articulate it because when you have experienced your nervous system literally being dysregulated and fight and flight your whole life from
yeah,
from
yeah.
the moment of my first memory, my nervous system has been dysregulated and I have been in fight or flight. And the moment that I took substance and felt as though all of a sudden I was regulated was the day
Yeah.
I was off to the races.
Was your addiction the same one that Matthew Perry had?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
thought so. I thought
yeah,
so. It doesn't surprise me because of his
yeah,
childhood.
yeah,
There's a lot of abandonment there as well, and
yeah.
you can just see how easy it is. And the thing is, did you find that you could almost justify it more so because it was prescribed?
Oh, 100%. So that was part of the journey that I share with not only the length of time that I used, but the dynamic between my husband and I. And so I was used for about 14 or 15 years and was prescribed everything that I ever took. So and this was in the early 2000s. I'm not sure how it was
Yeah.
in the UK, but the early 2000s in the United States of America, we call the opiate epidemic, right? Where
Right.
there was a lot of over prescribing going on. There was a lot, and I for sure was part of that, right? If I shared with your audience kind of what was prescribed to me in a monthly basis,
Yeah, yeah,
they would be blown away. But this is the thing, I had this medical component attached to my addiction, right? And so I believe that doctors, many of them were like, we don't like, I'd been to the Mayo Clinic, I'd had, different surgeries, I've had all these things, and nobody could figure out how to help my pain. And I had legitimate pain, right? I still am a chronic pain survivor, but I had legitimate pain. And so there's this mix between I was for sure addicted and they were trying desperately to help me get out of pain. So it is complex.
oh yeah,
It
yeah.
was especially complex in the early 2000s.
When did you realize that you had an addiction?
It's a great question, and I've tried to pinpoint the moment. I started having consequences in my life with
Yeah,
relationships.
what were the consequences?
Well, I think the relationships with my sister and my brother and my mom started to get even harder. And those, of course, were triggering relationships for me because they were the relationships that I looked to for the universe to tell me how unlovable I was. Right. And so when I had more conflict with them, it just created even more shame that was coming in my life, which was then just fueling my addiction. Again, some of the consequences normal people would have experienced, I didn't because, for instance, when I was stopped working for pain reasons, legitimate pain, but the real reason I wasn't able to work anymore was because I was a raging addict. And because I had the medical condition, I just got disability, my first shot at it, right? And so I went on disability. So there wasn't even that consequence necessarily early on. Um, I think the real consequence for me was, although the relationships with my daughter and my son and my husband were okay. I'm For those of you that can only uh, hear me and not see me, I'm doing quotations. Like they were okay, um,
Right.
but they weren't thriving and they weren't what they used to be. And that discomfort in my life started to create some consequences. But please don't get it twisted. It took a really, really, really long time for the consequences to start outweighing the benefits because there were a lot of benefits for me to use
There's,
substance.
there lies the problem. There lies the
Yes,
problem. It's not
yes.
just I had the actor Lilo Brancato on, and he was talking
Mhm.
about his addiction. A really interesting conversation there, and his was just
Yeah,
addiction that he's trying to get out of. I mean, that's bad enough, and luckily I've
yeah,
never had an addiction like that. Um, but for yourself, it's very complex because there's an
yes.
addiction that's affecting you in a bad way, but then it's helping you in several good ways. So it's a real
Well, and
paradox.
it allowed my medical condition allowed the people around me, I think, to enable me longer. For instance, if we
Right.
can talk about my husband is
Yeah.
a wonderful human being who is probably, if he was sitting right next to me right now, I would say the same thing. He's probably one of the best enablers in the business, right?
Right.
Like he's very good at it. And he did that for a long time because I had this medical condition. And he it's like this balancing act of trying to help me because he loves me, right? And
Yeah.
being, trying to help me through some of this, and then the wild behavior that was happening on the back end of it. So if I had a prescription that was due at midnight, my husband was there at 12:02 picking it up,
Right.
right? If the kids needed taken care of, he took care of them. If he were sitting here and I asked him what his worst regret in life would be, he would share with you that his worst regret in life is that he didn't protect his kids from me, which is
Right.
a really hard thing to hear, but his
Yeah.
truth, right?
What was going on there? Was it like because when I spoke to Lilo Brancato, we focused more on like the addiction, and I
Hmm.
said to him that what happened? Did you stop getting movie parts and stuff? And he said no. He said it was a slow it
Yes.
was a slow decline. It wasn't overnight. The actor, I started turning up late. I started not getting as many as I did, and things like that. And it was just a slow decline. So I never fell off a cliff to get rock bottom. I gradually got there. Was that the same for you?
Yeah, for the most part, it was for sure. Addiction, that's the way addiction works. If it were really awful from the beginning, none of us would start there, right? It becomes the solution
Yeah,
long before the consequences start outweighing those
yeah.
solutions. And so, yeah, it started happening for me slowly. I think my daughter would tell you a story that it wasn't until she was in high school. So when I had my brain tumor, my daughter was 5, right? So it wasn't until she was in high school, like 10 years later, that she had the epiphany, oh, my mom's actually an addict. She's just not in pain, right? She started to put the correlation together. And so you can imagine little by little that boulder was, going down that mountain. I would say by the in 10 years in is when nobody really liked me, right? Like
How come? How come? You're a really
I
nice
was I
person,
was
easy to
irrit
talk
I
to.
was
So
irritable.
what was
I
going on?
embarrassed them. I am,
Yeah.
like I would. One of the things in my addiction, I was prescribed Xanax every month.
Oh,
As many
God, right.
people that kind of have some trauma and some anxiety probably are given, and I would take it. So I was prescribed 2 a day, so 60 a month, and I would hold it and take it all in a week. And basically, if anyone's ever taken Xanax, it's like, I mean, I was wild behavior and don't remember any of it because I was basically
Oh,
just blacked out the entire time. So any sporting event that I would go to with my kids and I would had been taking Xanax, like I just embarrassed, like they were asked to not come
mm.
back to teams. I like nearly killed my daughter in a car one day being on Xanax. Like there were things happening, right? That were getting perpetually worse as this kind of ball went down the road. Um,
Where was your level of awareness through this at the time? Or because there are parts you can't even remember.
for sure. Specifically the times that I was taking Xanax, I don't remember, but I think the rest of the times, like I was aware that this was bad. Like I knew that
When
I
was that? When
um
was that?
I
When was the point you thought, oh, this is really serious now?
I think, well, I mean, let me just share with you what really was the kicker for
Sure.
me. So,
Yeah.
October 2016, um, my son was a senior in high school, and based on some events that happened in our home, I realized, and I don't say this lightly, but I realized I had inadvertently become my son's drug dealer,
Right.
and that my son was also addicted to opiates, and he was addicted to my opiates. And
Right.
for most people out there, they would hear that and say, "Oh, well, Jennifer, that must have been the day that you quit," right? That had to have been enough. That had to, like, the consequences finally had to have outweighed the benefits at that point. And they would be right, but it was not the day that I quit. I wish I could tell you that it was. It was the beginning to the end for me. But that's just an example of how off of the rails this thing got.
How did you start going in the other direction to come off of those? Because you're up against a lot. One, you've been doing it for so long. The pros that you've got with it, as well as the cons, and the fact it's an addiction as well, and the amount that you were taking. So how did you get the strength to start going in the right direction? How did that
Yeah,
happen?
I remember probably about 3 or 4 months after I we found out the kind of
Yeah,
the real situation that was going on with my son. I remember being in bed because that's where I always was in bed. And I'm thinking, okay, we got to find a solution to this, right? Like this is not the life. Even though I grew up in addiction, like from the outside world looking in, my family looked great. We weren't the family that was struggling. Like, right? We were. My dad was a very successful businessman. I did all the
yeah,
things. Like, this wasn't how I believed life should be, right? Even given what I had gone through as a child. And so I started contemplating, like, how do we get ourselves out of this? And my initial plan was how do I bow out gracefully, if you know what I mean, right?
yeah. Of
I
course.
I believed that the most selfless and loving thing that I could do for my son and my daughter and my husband was to complete suicide. And I want to say that because for those of your listeners that might not understand that mindset, like I didn't see how I was going to recover from this. I didn't
Yeah,
see, right? And I loved them so desperately. That's the thing about us that are addicts. Like, we love our families desperately. We are very deep feelers. And yet, we feel like we will step on their heads to get to oxygen. And we want to not do that, but we don't know how to stop, right? And I just thought that the only way that I could save them, I'm using quotations again for those of you that can't see me,
yeah.
save them is by killing myself. And so every night I kind of tried to take more pain pills than I had taken the day before. And when I realized that that kind of wasn't happening as I had planned, so I make a joke, and maybe it's funny, maybe it's not. Like when you've been raised in as much addiction as I have, like apparently we have great livers, right? And I kept waking up. And so at that point, afterwards, I was like, okay, we're going to have to come up with a different plan. And so my son graduated from high school, and the very next day, I checked myself into an inpatient facility. Um, and
How come
I,
that day? How come that day?
It was
Day after your son's
symbolic. Yeah,
graduating.
I think it was
Symbolic.
I think it was
Yeah.
symbolic. If I think any person or parent that has a child that's in high school, like I just kept saying, like, let's just get him graduated. Let's just get him through football season. Let's just, right? And it was just this goalpost that I was moving to kind of not deal with this thing. Let's just throw this all under the rug and get him graduated from high school. And so I think after he graduated, it was like, okay, it's, excuse my language of what I'm about ready to say, but it's either time to shit or get off the pot in a sense, right? Like you can't kick this can down the road anymore.
Anymore. Yeah.
I think the important thing to understand when I walked into that facility that day, I had like abstinence was not my goal. Like even recovery was not my goal. My goal was how do I start using like a gentle lady? How do I get my tolerance down? How do I get so many drugs out of the house so that my son, it's harder for him to get a hold of them? Like it was clearly like, how do I control this and manage this? Because I did not want to do life without my security blanket.
How did that go after checking yourself in?
Yeah, it was a wild 28 days.
Yeah.
Um, I share with people I was there about 3 or 4 days, so I was still pretty heavily detoxing. But there was a counselor that had made a comment, which I felt like was kind of a rude comment, if you will, that addicts just think they're victims. And I got pretty upset and stood up. I have a pretty strong personality. I stood up and said how much I didn't appreciate that and that I am a
Yeah.
victim. And a counselor pulled me in her office and said, "Hey, what's going on?" And I said, "I'll tell you, but this doesn't have anything to do with like how I'm going to use like a gentle lady, how I'm going to get so many drugs that like it has no correlation to any of this." And she's like, "What?" And I said, "I was sexually abused as a child." And after a couple of events, I had an opportunity to say that out loud. I had only really told my husband that because it wasn't a welcomed conversation in my family. Um,
Yeah.
and so when I had the opportunity to say it out loud, I was walking back to my room that night, and there was a lady that came up to me, and she was just weeping, and she said, "Jennifer, I was raped when I was 16, and you're the first person I've ever told." And that was the moment in time that I realized that substance isn't even close to the problem. Not even
Yeah.
close.
It's a secondary problem.
Substance was the solution, not the
Yeah.
problem, right?
Yeah.
And it was in that moment that I felt this deep connection, this deep sort of empathy and compassion for what everybody else was walking through, but also what finally I had some compassion and empathy for myself
For the first time for yourself.
for the first time in my whole life. Um, and I started to look at addiction less from a lens of shame, although I was just at the beginning of that work, right? Like that that takes a long time, and still it will be my life work to deal with my shame. But when she shared that with me, I was like, oh, we all earned our seats here. We earned them in a weird way. And yes, we did some deplorable things and we owe people amends and our decisions were awful. And all of that is true. And I used substance as a solution. And what happened there was the beginning of me realizing that I had to find a solution that was outside of substance. I had to start learning different coping skills. I had to have courage to sit in the proverbial cave, if you will. I have a quote up here that says by Joseph Campbell, which is, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." And I sought like peace and serenity and worth and value and connection, but I had never had enough courage to walk inside of this cave to find it because
Yeah.
it was too much. It was too hard. And
Yeah.
and people would speak about this treasure that they were experiencing and I'm looking for it over like rock walls, right? While I'm high going, "Where's this proverbial treasure that you guys speak about?" And it wasn't until that 28 days of inpatient and then another 6 months of outpatient after that that I started to understand that I use substance as a solution to what had happened to me in my life, and that
Yeah.
I had to learn how to manage that and heal from it and walk through that without substance.
How do you manage that? How did you deal with the
Well,
pain?
it's a wild thing, right? And I am not a I don't blow smoke up anyone's you know what. Like this is the thing. It is going to be my life work. Um, I've been sober for 8.5 years now, and there are still an occasional day that I wake up buried by shame, right? Just buried by sadness and grief and the sort of the cards, if you will, that I have been dealt in my life. But the beautiful thing is that's about 1% of my life, if not in the other 99% of my life is full of joy. And the reason why that is true today is because number one, I've started to deal with my own physical pain, right? That was a big barrier to me getting sober was I knew that the chronic pain was not going to go away when I
Yeah.
stopped using opiates. So
How'd you
that
deal with that?
well, I've had to learn other coping skills. So, meditation is a big deal, exercise is a big deal, journaling is a big deal. There's some medications that are safe for me to take that help, right? There's no magic shot. There's no like, we're going to snap your fingers, Jennifer, and you're going to be out of pain. But there are things that I have been able to do that keep it to a level that I can maintain my life, which I'm super grateful for. And there are days that are harder than others, right? Like it just is how it is. Um, so that was a barrier to me getting sober, but one that I had to figure out pretty early on if I was going to stay sober. Um, I think that the second thing that had to happen and happened pretty early, I would say probably I was 3 or 4 months sober, was me to forgive my grandfather. Um, and I say that not from a perspective that if he were alive today, I would break bread with him. That's not the kind of forgiveness I'm talking about, right? But when I was going through this journey, it was like a spiritual moment. I can't even describe it, but I realized that my grandfather, had changed who I was
Yeah.
at like 3, right? Um, and I was powerless over that, and I didn't have control over that, and that wasn't my fault. But what had happened after that, as an adult, was I was willingly giving him my power. I was willingly allowing him to continue to change my heart. I was
Yeah.
continuing allowing him the power of decision making and feelings and the way relationships were. And he had been
Yeah.
dead for decades.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so in that moment, I was like, we are not doing that anymore. Right? We are taking our power back. We are becoming who we truly were meant to be. And you don't get to have that much control and power over me anymore. And that created this moment of forgiveness from a sense of, and
Yeah.
forgiveness for me meant I was able to look at it from a lens of, this is going to sound wild, compassion and empathy. So again, my grandfather was a twin and they both abused children. So I have to make some assumptions there that he experienced a pretty difficult childhood as well.
You would
Yeah,
guarantee it pretty
yeah.
much from my
And
experience.
although what he did is like, and I'm not the only person he did it to, right? Like
No,
it's their
of
stories
course
to
not.
tell, but I'm not the only one. But this
Yeah.
is the thing, I was able to look at it from a lens of like, I'm sorry that you went through that too, right? And if you were alive today, I'm still not breaking bread with you. Like it's a complicated, like
I
forgiveness
get where you're coming from. Yeah.
is a complicated deal, but that was pivotal in me sort of being able to stay sober.
That yeah, and for you to get to that frame of reference and to be able to do that gives you that real opportunity to heal. The biggest thing is, and from my own experiences, is to not carry hate around to
Yeah.
like my mother
Yeah.
and stepfather. I've forgiven not in a million years. Do I hate them? I do, but I'm not going to carry the hate around with them because, as the saying goes, having hate is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. there's
Yeah.
no point. So
And I think that
that
that's what I was trying to say too, which is like I don't love him, right?
yeah.
I don't would never want to like I hope one day when I get to heaven he's not there, right? That's like that's just the truth. But
Yeah.
it was no longer allowing him to like I was allowing him to change.
Carry on the abuse to a degree.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 And so that was the day. And the other thing that was really important for me that I learned in that inpatient time was that I knew that the only way to save my son was to save myself.
Yeah. I get
Like
that.
that was
How's your son doing now?
he's good. He got sober in 2020 and you know, this thing isn't a straight line and
It
it's
never
like
is.
a roller coaster and he deals with his own shame and his own addiction in the sense of like what coping skills do I use today that is not substance and our recovery doesn't look the same, but I couldn't be more proud of him in the
Yeah.
sense that um he has changed his mindset. He deals and that's the thing. Like I have to have enough courage. He has to have enough courage. Um, every family member has to have enough courage to work through their own individual shame. Like my shame is a me problem, and it is my job to continue to do that work. And I think one of the things I'm most proud about him is that he hasn't quit on himself and he continues to do that work.
He's also got you to look at and see how you've overcome everything and how you manage things there as well. So in that sense, you've got a strong role model that knows how to overcome addictions.
Well, and I think that that's the interesting thing about those of us that are recovering is he deserved that a long time ago, right?
Yeah.
He deserved a mama that showed him how to do hard. He deserved a mama that figured out how to regulate her nervous system without substance. Like he deserved this from the beginning, but unfortunately, that's not the cards he was given. And so there are days where I don't want to do it, right? I don't want to be the model for him.
Yeah.
However, it is reminded to me like this is a living amends that I provide my children every single day that I do hard because they deserved it a long time ago.
And tell us about what you're doing now, helping other people that's a similar
Yeah.
experience, because that seems pretty amazing what you're doing.
So 6 years, for 6 years, I worked in the treatment field. I worked in an outpatient program that I adored. It was actually the one that I went through, helped build that company and loved every single bit of it. But there was this pull that was happening for me in my life. And as I was healing and doing this work, this very personal work, I started to realize that the feelings that I had initially as a child was that God had just left me on the doorstep, right? He was kind of like everybody else that said this one's not really worth fighting for. And that I wasn't that lovable even to God. And as I started to do this work of healing, I started to realize like, oh, maybe there's a chance that God needed me to experience every single step of this in order to live my purpose. And so was I when I was working in the field that just this pull was like, okay, you're a daughter of an alcoholic, you're an addict in recovery. You understand from a spouse's perspective because you have walked this with your husband in a lot of sense,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you're a mama, right? Like, is there a chance that your purpose is to go help the family recover? Because
Yeah.
anybody that understands addiction understands that this thing is a family disease. And
Yeah.
and when I say that substance is not the problem, it's the solution to the problem. If we look at it as it's the problem, then we send our loved one off to get sober and we tell them to jump right back on this dance floor, if you will, that we dance with as a family and say, okay, we want you to be sober. And as your neighborhood addict, I'm saying to you, like, there was only two ways I was going to be able to be on that dance floor. And the first one was high,
Yeah.
or the second one is to not be on the dance floor and get off and walk away from those people. And what was required of me and my family was, okay, we all have to get on this dance floor that doesn't serve us anymore. And we've got to choose a new dance. that works together, that we can all be authentic on this dance floor. And I said earlier that addicts feel like a square peg in a round hole. And
Yeah.
oftentimes, where that started was on that dance floor with their
Yeah.
family. And that's why they
Yeah.
can never get back on that dance floor and just be sober.
Yeah. Yeah. I've,
And so
I get that. Yeah.
my work now is to help the people around, right? The supporting characters in the sense of helping the mamas decide how they are contributing to the solution or the problem. Like
Yeah.
enabling is so difficult in these relationships because what it feels like to be a mom when they're 5 is no longer applicable when they are 27 and an alcoholic or an addict, right? It's counterintuitive and we have to look
Yeah.
at it differently.
Yeah.
Um, and so helping these moms and these sisters and brothers and dads and um, just learn to contribute to the solution rather to continue to contribute to the problem.
I think it's great what you do. I love it. It sounds like you get so much fulfillment from what you do. You can
Yeah.
tell.
Yeah. It's pretty, I mean, I would do it for free. I mean, I'm not going to just because, we got to make money, but I
Yeah.
would absolutely do this for free in the sense that it feels like the only thing that makes sense of my life. It feels like the only thing that if I can tell myself like you walked through this and now you're using that to help other people,
You
somehow it helps me heal.
you hear the saying pain into purpose, but you
Yeah.
literally have put pain into purpose, mentally, physically into purpose to help others there, as well as yourself along the way there as well. I think this episode has been such an empowering
Mm.
episode. It's been amazing listening to you. There's so much that resonates with me with a lot of what you're saying, and with like clients of mine, with their addictions or whatever. But just listening to your story because it's not your standard addiction story. There's so much more complex to it. There's so many layers to it there as well, because you're getting benefits to it as well. And then you got to stop that. And then that's going to cause you pain there as well. So it's not like I'm taking loads of cocaine, I need to stop.
Right.
It's like, yeah, but hold on, but this is going to solve one problem, but it's going to cause me these other problems, and you've got to navigate that there as well. And I would imagine there'll be a lot of people listening to that that will be able to relate to that for whatever their stories are there as well. Jennifer, it's been an absolute pleasure having you come onto the podcast. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you.